Life swings like a pendulum, backward and forward between pain and boredom. This quote perfectly summarizes Arthur Schopenhauer's pessimistic philosophy. He believes that life swings endlessly between two extremes, suffering and boredom, and both are linked by our desires. Suffering comes from not having what we want, and boredom is the consequence of obtaining what we want. Every time we satisfy a desire, we're left facing an empty void which leads to boredom. On the other hand, when we can't satisfy our desires, we suffer. And it doesn't end here, because when we're bored, we also suffer from a desire that has no aim or direction, which then causes even more suffering. No matter what we do, we're constantly caught in this cycle of suffering, and this is the core of his pessimistic philosophy. For Schopenhauer, this is the nature of life and our human condition. He says, all willing arises from lack, from deficiency, and thus from suffering. The satisfaction of a wish ends it, yet for one wish that is satisfied, there remain at least 10 which are denied. In today's video, we're going to explore this concept of desire to understand the core of Schopenhauer's philosophy and see not only how it impacts but also controls our lives. Born in 1788, Arthur Schopenhauer was a 19th century German philosopher best known for his deeply pessimistic view of human existence. Schopenhauer's most influential work, The World as Will and Representation, published in its first edition in 1819, presented the idea that life is driven by an irrational force that he called the will to live. He defines it as an unconscious, ceaseless striving that manifests itself in every action and impulse of living beings. If you're interested in philosophy or watch my videos, you'll notice that this same idea connects to other philosophers' concepts like Nietzsche's will to power, Bergson's élan vital, Spinoza's conatus, or even Maslow's and Rogers' ideas on self-actualization. However, only Schopenhauer saw it in a negative light and considered it as a source of endless pain and suffering, instead of a positive force for growth and evolution. So why is that? The answer can be found in his masterpiece, The World as Will and Representation. The title might seem complicated, but what he explains is actually simple and well put. For Schopenhauer, there are two ways to view the world. First, there's the world as representation, which is essentially the product of our own consciousness. In other words, it's a rational representation where everything is clear, explained, and has a meaning and a cause. In this view, we have the impression that we're the masters of our actions and that we're acting consciously, following rational decisions. The second view is entirely different. It's the world as will. This is the hidden side of our consciousness, where things are less rational, more instinctive and chaotic. For Schopenhauer, this is the more realistic way of seeing the world, a place driven by our unconscious and irrational striving force. In this view, our unconscious drives and impulses dictate our actions and desires, beyond our conscious understanding or control. For example, we constantly have objects or targets of desires, like a person, a car, a meal, or a job. What these desires have in common is that they're all directed towards something outside of ourselves, an object that is always beyond our reach, that we lack and are trying to attain. Let's deviate quickly to explain this notion of lack, which perfectly reflects how Plato viewed desire. Plato believed that desire arises from a sense of lack or deficiency. According to him, we desire what we don't have, and this longing points to something missing within us. We only desire what we don't have or what we feel we're missing. After all, if we possessed everything we wanted, we would have no reason to desire anything. Plato extends this idea to all forms of desire, but he focuses on love as the most intense manifestation of it. In the Symposium, Plato presents this idea through Socrates, who argues that love is the pursuit of something we lack, often beauty or goodness, which we yearn to possess because it makes us feel whole. In the same book, there is the story of the androgynes told by Aristophanes that also highlights the same idea. He explains that humans were originally spherical beings with 4 arms, 4 legs, 2 faces, and 3 sexes: male, male, female, female, and male, female. These beings were powerful but arrogant and difficult to rule, so fearing their strength, Zeus split them in half. Each person became incomplete, and ever since, humans have been searching for their other half to feel whole again. This myth symbolizes love as the desire to reunite with our lost half, driven by a deep sense of incompleteness. And this, according to Aristophanes, is the reason of love and desire. In this context, desire seems perfectly understandable because it's simply a search for what we lack, so we can always find conscious reasons and motivations that push us to attain the desired object. It's comforting to know that the things we desire are desired for a specific reason, and in this case, we like to believe that we're the masters of our own desires, Everything comes from us. We're the source of desires, and we're the ones who decide what to desire. However, for Schopenhauer, it's not exactly like that. He agrees that desire stems from lack or deficiency, but disagrees with the fact that it can be the product of conscious reasoning or have any rational explanation at all. For Schopenhauer, our desires stem from our unconscious and irrational part, our will. So we have no way to actually understand it or even access it. We're simply manifesting it. And that's why when asked about the origin of our desires, we might feel some type of confusion because we can't really identify the origin. However, we can come up with rational reasons and motivations that we create for ourselves to make everything more understandable and thus more livable, but we can't understand where it comes from. We can't understand the origin. Let's take an example to illustrate Schopenhauer's point. If we understand the origin of our desire, then how can we justify the appearance of a new desire when the old or initial desire has been fulfilled? So technically speaking, if a desire is linked to a lack or deficiency, and then we satisfy this desire, that means that we fill this lack. So in this case, no new desire should form or appear in our lives, or at least no new desire related to the initial desire should form or appear. But what Schopenhauer is saying is that this isn't necessarily the case. He says, man can indeed do what he wants, but he cannot will what he wants. From Schopenhauer's perspective, man is a puppet of his own desires and is controlled by them. He spends his life trying to fulfill these desires, only to discover that once achieved, they cease to be desired and hold no appeal. Humans believe that their actions are driven by legitimate and conscious motivations, but in reality, these motivations are nothing but illusions. Illusions created to give meaning to their constant striving and weariness. In an absurd world devoid of any meaning, achieving the desired object has no real purpose, as it ultimately leads to boredom rather than satisfaction. Happiness then is only a man-made illusion to justify our striving and make it seem necessary. We convince ourselves that we're doing something important in a world that has meaning, but in reality, it doesn't have any meaning. So why do we lie to ourselves? Why can't we embrace the meaninglessness of our lives? Schopenhauer says because we need to act as if life has a meaning and our actions have a purpose. And without this, life becomes unbearable. We tell ourselves we'll be happy if we get a certain job, lose weight, or date someone. But in reality, we're just submitting to the will within us. We're simply attaching labels to pre-existing desires that were already there. Here we have an opposing view between another philosopher whom Schopenhauer appreciated and studied extensively, Spinoza. The difference between the two is that for Spinoza, the will isn't an independent, all-powerful force, but rather a passive response to internal and external causes. Spinoza's universe is governed by strict determinism. Everything follows the laws of nature, which are rational and necessary. This drive is not irrational, but is part of a logically ordered system. Schopenhauer, on the other hand, viewed the will as irrational, blind, and impersonal. It drives all beings to strive for existence and fulfillment of desires, without any logical or rational goal. Since it operates independently of human consciousness, we are at its mercy and can only submit to the desires and impulses it produces. It's an unconscious primal force that compels every action, from basic survival instincts to complex human desires. And this highlights the absurdity of the situation. Our desires have no clear end goal, cause, or specific aim. We desire because something inside of us desires. That's why we can feel disappointed when we get something we thought we really wanted, simply because we never clearly understood what drove us in the first place. This perspective has paved the way for Freudian psychoanalysis because if we establish that powerful irrational forces are dictating our desires, then we need to look beyond what our consciousness suggests and try to understand the underlying motives behind our actions. This was Freud's goal, to explore what lies beyond our conscious mind. For Schopenhauer, not understanding our will leads to anxiety because we feel controlled by a complex and unclear force. Anxiety arises when we can no longer express our desires clearly or don't know exactly what we want. As mentioned in the video on anxiety, fear is always directed towards something specific, while anxiety is not necessarily tied to anything identifiable. It's just there. This lack of direction makes anxiety much worse than fear. Desiring things that are illegal or forbidden, desiring contradictory things, constantly changing our desires, or simply not knowing what to desire. All these situations create anxiety and leave us feeling lost and confused. In this case, anxiety stems from the tension between our desires, which are chaotic, irrational, and always changing. Knowing that no matter what we achieve, we'll eventually desire something else leads to anxiety. This endless striving creates uncertainty about the future and makes us constantly doubt our pursuits. Every satisfaction he attains lays the seeds of some new desire, so that there is no end to the wishes of each individual will. Anxiety arises when we realize that our striving is ultimately meaningless and absurd. We become aware that we're trying to assign conscious motivations to our actions, when in reality, we're simply trying to find meaning to our existence, as it's unbearable to live with the feeling that life is absurd. In general, if we're setting objectives, assigning meaning to our actions, and constantly seeking activities to occupy ourselves, it's because it makes the world more rational and predictable, and thus more livable. We want to feel in control, and engaging in these activities gives us that sense of control and prevents us from confronting our human condition. This is our constant search for meaning, in a world that has none. To finish the video, I would like to examine the protagonist in Fyodor Dostoevsky's novel Notes from Underground. Schopenhauer's theory of desires and the desires of the underground man are closely linked through the themes of irrationality, the futility of desire, and the rejection of reason. The underground man exhibits irrational desires that conflict with reason. He often desires things that cause him suffering and humiliation, rejecting logic and rational self-interest. He acts against what would seem beneficial or reasonable, purely because he can. He even takes pride in this defiance, showing that his desires are not shaped by reason, but by some deeper, irrational force within him. He's also caught up in this endless cycle of striving and disappointment. Even when he achieves what he thinks he wants, such as confronting his former schoolmates or attempting to dominate Lisa, he remains unhappy and conflicted. His desires, like those described by Schopenhauer, bring no real fulfillment, only more inner turmoil. The underground man reflects this lack of control and understanding over his desires. He despises the idea of being predictable or conforming to rational expectations of society. Instead, he exercises his freedom by choosing irrational actions which paradoxically seem to further prove his lack of true free will. His desires appear absurd and self-destructive, yet he clings to them as a form of rebellion against the deterministic view of life. He wants to be the architect of his life, yet he's unaware that he's being controlled by his will. Finally, the underground man embodies this sense of absurdity described by Schopenhauer. He's aware of the meaninglessness of his desires, yet he continues to act, without any end goal or purpose. His struggle to find purpose in a seemingly indifferent world reflects Schopenhauer's view of existence as absurd and driven by irrational forces. This makes the human condition one of constant striving and suffering, with no ultimate meaning. Now you can understand why Schopenhauer is seen as a philosopher of pessimism, who went to the extent of saying that human life must be some kind of mistake. And this is why I came to appreciate Friedrich Nietzsche even more, because he built on Schopenhauer's concept of the will, but transformed it into something much more positive and empowering. But that will be discussed in another video. Let me know in the comments how you see your desires. Do you think our desires are meaningless and a source of suffering, or do you resonate more with Nietzsche, seeing them as a life-affirming force that drives us to overcome obstacles, grow, and achieve greatness? Thank you for watching. Hello guys, my name is Mustafa and I'm the creator behind Beyond Theory. I've been studying philosophy for the past 10 years as an autodidact, and last year I've decided to share my passion with the world by making YouTube videos about philosophical concepts and presenting them in a simple and practical manner. If you enjoy my content or find it valuable, don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe. It means a lot to me. Thank you for your support.